Oscar Piastri's F1 Championship lead has crumbled to nothing after back-to-back difficult weekends and a big performance swing towards McLaren teammate Lando Norris. Norris claimed the lead of this title fight for the first time since April's Bahrain Grand Prix, with a commanding victory in Mexico, producing probably his best performance of the season so far, while Piastri had a torrid weekend and saw a 14-point advantage transformed into a 1-point deficit. Piastri's drop-off has been so sudden and so severe it seems very strange on the surface. He's gone from scoring 14 podiums in the first 16 races of 2025 to having a 4-race run without finishing inside the top 3, and a 34-point lead after Norris retired from the Dutch Grand Prix has vanished in the 5 races since. There are several different reasons for this, like Piastri crashing out of the Azerbaijan Grand Prix and finishing behind Norris in Singapore after first lap contact between the two, but in the US and Mexico, Piastri was simply slow. The US-Mexico doubleheader was very disappointing for Piastri, and after spending the Austin event 0.3 off Norris's pace, it got even worse in Mexico. Piastri found a constant gap of more than half a second through practice and qualifying, which he called a mystery, as he felt the car was fine and that he was driving the same as normal. So this translating to 8th in qualifying and then 5th in the race behind Ollie Bearman's Haas was confusing for Piastri. There was a silver lining in that a tough weekend for Red Bull put the brakes on Max Verstappen's seemingly relentless charge in closing down the McLaren drivers in the championship, and Piastri is still in a very good position to win the title, given there are 4 race weekends to go and he can fix this by starting to beat Norris again. But that's less likely to happen when his form has slumped to such a degree, and making sure it doesn't continue is Piastri's primary concern. Otherwise, there will be no title battle. Piastri will slip out of contention long before Abu Dhabi. Piastri's sharp decline has inevitably led to speculation about what's holding him back, especially as accusations of McLaren favouring Norris have been rife for some time. As dramatic as that would be, there is no evidence of McLaren doing Piastri dirty, and no indication from Piastri or the people around him that foul play has occurred. Even though the Constructors' Championship is secure, there is no sense in McLaren hurting one of its drivers, as even the most basic logic will tell you that McLaren needs to be sure one of its drivers beats Verstappen, so compromising the one with the most points coming into Mexico would be nonsensical. And even if McLaren preferred Norris to be champion and wanted to facilitate that, why hobble Piastri to such a degree that he's so far off the pace that he's behind Verstappen, and therefore not even helping Norris's point swing against the Red Bull driver? And that's before you factor in why McLaren would pay a driver millions of dollars just to screw them over. Questioning strategic choices and identifying potential patterns in when McLaren interferes and when it doesn't is one thing, but any kind of direct performance tampering falls down to even basic scrutiny. But what about some more legitimate theories for what could, even accidentally, be holding Piastri back? With both drivers understood to be on similar setups, the first possibility to consider is whether there might be some underlying car problem. This is a legitimate theory, given there could perhaps be some undetected damage carried over from their first corner collision in the Austin sprint race. Piastri didn't rule this out, and reading between the lines, you might even conclude he's hinting at it when he says he felt he did a reasonable job in Mexico and that there's been stuff he can tidy up himself, but it doesn't explain all of the gap. That's what led to him calling his lack of pace a bit of a mystery. Piastri also said the overall feel of the car was normal, and McLaren has ruled out car damage being a factor about as emphatically as it can without being 100% sure. Team boss Andrea Stella said, "Every evidence, every piece of data, every indirect measurement of information we have tells us that there is no problem with the car, and we have no reason to suspect that that's the case." That doesn't completely rule out the possibility something has not been found, but makes it unlikely, and even a chassis change just to give Piastri and McLaren peace of mind doesn't seem to be on the cards, as Stella says it's much more likely that the floor or the front wing would carry some kind of undetectable limitation, and those components are often rotated anyway. Plus, Piastri had a pretty decent race in Mexico, moving forwards and gaining 2 places from his grid position, which wouldn't have been possible if his car wasn't working as it should. McLaren's current explanation for Piastri's slump is rooted in his particular driving technique, which has generally otherwise been extremely successful this season. Stella suggested this has not proved well suited to the combination of sliding and low grip conditions, despite hot track surfaces prevalent both in Austin and Mexico. Norris is more in tune with those demands because he thrives when the track itself is lower grip, or, in a different example, when the tyres are worn at the end of a stint. In Mexico, we saw Norris at his very best, and he puts this down to an important 30-minute debrief after Singapore, during which he explained to the team why the car there was behaving in a way he didn't like, and that McLaren wouldn't win more races this year unless they changed it. Norris says the car is now giving him more of what he needs to be fast in terms of feeling, and his performances in Austin and Mexico have reflected that newfound comfort. For Piastri, who McLaren says excels more in high grip conditions, the past two races in particular have been more difficult. Piastri started the Mexico weekend believing his troubles in the US were specific to the Circuit of the Americas, another low grip track. During FP2 in Mexico though, there was already a hint that there was something in common with the difficulties, as Norris was better at maximising the combination of attacking the braking zones without triggering problematic rear sliding. Piastri can be mighty on the brakes, but one of the themes as he worked on his technique through the Mexico weekend was experimenting with braking points and braking for longer but with less pressure. He made progress, but not enough to stop bleeding lap time to Norris everywhere in qualifying, braking for turn 1, carrying speed through the 90-degree corners in the first and second sectors, and even the faster sweeps from turn 7 to turn 11, where Piastri would typically be stronger at high speed. Piastri characterised it as losing a little bit everywhere, and there was no one corner or corner sequences during practice and qualifying where Norris wasn't the quicker driver. That could potentially be explained by an underlying car problem, but it could just be an aggregation of small differences and not controlling the rear tyre temperatures as well against a teammate who was on his best form in a while. Stella was keen to point out Piastri still has not yet completed his third season in F1, and the unusual combination of low grip, hot tarmac isn't something that arises very often. In Mexico specifically, there was a unique combination of a soft C5 tyre and no graining, which is very different to last year and created what Stella called a quite particular regime around which to manage the preparation and execution of a qualifying lap. This does tally with Piastri getting better as the weekend went on, having his cleanest laps in Q3 and progressing decently past some slower cars in the race. He just never got comfortable enough to be as fast as usual when catching up to Norris through a weekend. Given how effective Piastri has been at stepping up his performance during weekends and excelling at tracks where he'd struggled last year, it's understandable that he was confounded in Mexico by the fact he wasn't able to turn things around. A double header and a unique Mexico challenge might have presented too steep a learning curve even for Piastri, so maybe a week off and then a very different challenge in Brazil will afford the time and space to get clearer answers. In Mexico, all Piastri could do after qualifying was learn what he could to help him limit the damage in the race. That went pretty well in the circumstances, as Mexico turned out to be strategically marginal between one or two pit stops. Piastri was able to execute an aggressive two-stopper to get himself ahead of the two Mercedes and into the top 5 from an unpromising grid position and a difficult first lap. Piastri said it was clear after qualifying there were a few things he needed to change majorly in his driving for the race, and Stella indicated McLaren had also made a few tweaks to the car to try to make Piastri more comfortable. It would seem on the evidence of the race that Piastri made progress in terms of unlocking more potential from himself in the car, though Piastri himself found it difficult to judge the level of improvement he made in his driving because he spent so much of his race in the dirty air of other cars. Whatever the case, McLaren feels Piastri will be better off for this experience because it will help him become, in the words of Stella, a more complete version of a Formula 1 driver. But in terms of what really counts, the championship points table, Mexico can't be viewed as anything other than a significant setback for Piastri's title chances. If McLaren's right and this US-Mexico doubleheader disaster can simply be explained by a very specific combination of circumstances that Piastri is just not quite on top of yet, the situation could quickly fix itself. Assuming there are no other known or unknown variables at play, there is every reason to expect that when he returns to action at the Brazilian Grand Prix, Piastri will be back to normal and every bit the championship threat. If he isn't, and this alarming dip persists, his title bid will collapse completely, and then there will be fresh questions for McLaren to answer about the cause.